I realized something was wrong the day my youngest granddaughter stopped whispering secrets into my ear. It was a small thing, so small that anyone else might have missed it. But I didn't, because for years that had been our ritual. Every Sunday afternoon after lunch, when the plates were still warm and the smell of cinnamon tea lingered in the air, little Nora would climb onto the arm of my chair. She would press her lips close to my ear, her breath soft and sweet, and tell me something she didn't want anyone else to hear. Sometimes it was about school, sometimes about a friend who had said something unkind, sometimes about a fear she didn't know how to name. And I would listen, I always listened. That day she sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched, but she didn't lean in, she didn't whisper, she just smiled politely and then slid off the chair to go sit next to her mother. I remember the exact sound her shoes made against the wooden floor, a soft, hollow tap. It echoed more than it should have. At first I told myself it was nothing. Children grow, they change, they outgrow little habits like that, but then I noticed the others. My grandson Ethan used to come to me when he got into trouble at school. He would sit at the kitchen table, picking at the edge of his sleeve, waiting for me to ask what was wrong. I never rushed him. I would pour him a glass of milk. Sometimes I'd add a little honey just the way he liked it when he was younger. He would talk slowly, carefully, as if choosing each word mattered. But that week when I asked him how school had been, he shrugged. "Fine," he said, just one word. And he didn't meet my eyes. It wasn't like him. Children don't just stop needing someone to listen. They stop when they feel they shouldn't. That thought stayed with me longer than I wanted to admit. Before all of this, my home had always been a place where things were said quietly, where nothing felt too big or too small to bring to the table. I had built that kind of space over the years, not perfectly, but carefully. After my husband passed, I kept the routines alive. Sunday lunches, the old wooden table that had a small crack running through the middle, the same curtains that let in soft afternoon light. My son Hendrix used to say the house smelled like comfort, like something steady, he called it. He brought the children every weekend without fail, and even after he remarried, that didn't change, at least not at first. His wife Melissa was polite. That's the word I always used. She had a careful smile, the kind that appeared quickly and disappeared just as fast. She kept her hair tied neatly, never a strand out of place. Even when she laughed, it felt measured, as though she was aware of being watched. I tried in the beginning, I really did. I would ask her about her week, about her work. I made dishes I thought she might like, even when they were different from what we usually ate. She always thanked me, but she never stayed in the kitchen long enough to talk. She preferred to sit in the living room with her phone, her legs crossed, her voice low when she spoke. And slowly, without anyone saying it out loud, something in the house began to shift. It was subtle, like a draft you can't quite locate. The children started sitting closer to her. At first I thought it was natural, a new bond forming, that's how it should be. But then I noticed the way they would look at her before answering me, just a glance, quick, almost invisible, but it was there. As if they were checking something or asking permission without words. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen washing dishes when I heard Nora's voice from the hallway. It was soft, hesitant. "Mama, can I tell Grandma about it?" There was a pause. I turned off the tap without thinking, my hands still wet. I don't know why I held my breath. Melissa's voice came next. "Calm, even. It's better if you don't, sweetheart." Another pause. "But why?" Nora asked, and there it was. That small, fragile question that children ask when they don't understand the rules they've been given. I waited. I don't know what I expected to hear. Maybe something reasonable. Maybe something kind. Instead, Melissa said, "Some things are just for family. Family." The word settled in the air like something heavier than it should have been. I stood there, staring at the sink, at the reflection of light in the water, because I didn't know what that made me. That evening, I tried to ignore it. I sat at the table as usual, served dinner, passed the bread, asked simple questions. Everyone answered. Everything looked normal. But it didn't feel normal, not to me. There was a distance in the room I couldn't measure. Like an invisible line had been drawn and I hadn't been told where it was. At one point, Ethan started to say something. "Today at school and then he stopped, mid-sentence. His eyes flicked toward Melissa. She gave him a small look, not harsh, not angry, just enough. And he lowered his gaze. "Nothing," he said. "I forgot." Children don't forget like that, not when they've already begun speaking. I felt something tighten in my chest then, not pain, not yet, but something close to it. That night after they left, I walked through the house slowly. I do that sometimes. It helps me think. The living room still held the faint scent of Melissa's perfume, something floral, light but persistent. I paused by the armchair where Nora used to sit. I ran my hand over the fabric. It was still warm, but it felt empty. I don't know how else to explain it. And for the first time, a question formed in my mind that I didn't want to ask. Who had taught them to pull away from me? Because children don't just decide that on their own. Someone shows them, gently, quietly, again and again, until it feels like their own idea. I stood there for a long time listening to the silence. And in that silence, something else began to grow, not anger, not yet. But a quiet, steady unease, the kind that tells you something is changing whether you're ready for it or not. The next Sunday, I decided I would pay closer attention, not to confront, not to accuse, just to see, because sometimes the truth doesn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it reveals itself in the smallest moments. A glance, a pause, a word that isn't said, and I had a feeling I had already missed too many of those. The next Sunday arrived quieter than the ones before it, not in sound, in feeling. I woke up early as I always did. The house was still dark, and for a moment I lay in bed listening to the soft hum of the heater. It had been colder lately, the kind of cold that settles into the bones if you're not careful. I sat up slowly. There was a time when Sundays filled me with a kind of quiet anticipation, not excitement, something steadier than that, purpose. I would plan the meal the night before, set the table just so. Fold the napkins the way my mother taught me, even though no one ever noticed anymore. But that morning, I hesitated. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty table, my hand resting on the back of one of the chairs. For a brief second, I wondered if I should do things differently, cook less, make it simpler, not try so hard. The thought came and went, but it left something behind. A small, uncomfortable question. Was I the only one still holding on to what Sundays used to be? By mid-morning, the house began to fill with familiar sounds. The front door opening, shoes being slipped off near the entrance. Voices overlapping, Hendrix's deeper tone, Melissa's measured one, the lighter, quicker voices of the children. "Hi, Mom," Hendrix said as he stepped into the kitchen. He kissed my cheek the way he always had, but even that felt slightly different, more hurried, like he was already thinking about something else. "Smells good in here," he added, glancing at the stove. "Chicken and rice," I said, "the way you like it." He smiled. "Always," he replied, and then he turned toward the living room. The children followed behind him. Ethan gave me a quick hug. Nora waved, just a small wave, not the kind that comes with running feet or laughter, just polite. Again, that word, polite. It settled in my chest in a way I didn't like. I watched as they moved past me, their attention already shifting elsewhere. Melissa entered last. She paused at the doorway, her eyes scanning the kitchen briefly. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," I replied. There was a pause. A space where something more could have been said, but it was. She nodded once, then turned and walked toward the others. Lunch unfolded the way it always did. Plates were filled. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. The rhythm of passing dishes and asking for salt, for water, for another piece of bread. On the surface, everything was the same, but I had learned over the years that sameness can hide many things. I watched, not obviously, just enough. Ethan kept his answers short. Nora stayed close to Melissa, her body angled toward her as if that was where she felt most comfortable. And Hendrix seemed distracted. He checked his phone more than once. Not constantly, but enough that I noticed. At one point, I asked him about work. He gave me an answer, but it felt rehearsed, like something he had said before. Halfway through the meal, I decided to try something small, something simple. "Nora," I said gently, "did anything interesting happen at school this week?" She looked up. For a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes, the old instinct, the one that used to bring her closer to me. She began, and then she stopped. Her gaze shifted, not to me, to Melissa. It was quick. So quick that if I hadn't been watching for it, I might have missed it. Melissa didn't speak. She didn't shake her head or raise her voice. She just gave a slight smile, the kind that could mean anything. Nora looked back at her plate. "It was normal," she said quietly. "Normal. Children don't describe their lives as normal unless they've learned to." I nodded. "That's good," I replied, but something inside me tightened again, a little more this time. After lunch, I carried the plates to the sink. The familiar clink of porcelain against porcelain filled the kitchen. Water ran, steam rose. Behind me I could hear the low murmur of voices from the living room. Laughter, soft, controlled. I dried my hands and paused. There it was again, that feeling. That I was standing just outside of something I used to be inside. I stepped into the hallway quietly, not to listen. At least that's what I told myself. But I didn't announce my presence either. Nora's voice reached me first. "Mama, can I show you what I drew?" "Of course," Melissa replied. There was a rustle of paper, a small pause, and then Melissa said, "That's very nice, you're getting better." "I wanted to show Grandma too," Nora added. My heart lifted just a little. "But then, maybe later," Melissa said. "Let's keep it between us for now." The words were soft, gentle, even, but they landed heavily. "Why?" Nora asked again. There was that question, that fragile curiosity. Melissa exhaled lightly. "Because not everyone needs to know everything," she said. And then, after a pause, she added, "It's important to have boundaries." Boundaries, it was a word I had heard more often in recent years. A good word in many ways, a necessary one, but standing there in that hallway, it didn't feel like protection. It felt like exclusion. I stepped back into the kitchen before they could see me. My hands rested on the counter. I stared at the small crack in the wood. It had been there for years. It hadn't grown. It hadn't changed. But now it seemed more noticeable. As if I was seeing it for the first time. Later that afternoon, as the sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the floor, Ethan wandered into the kitchen. He stood near the doorway for a moment, not entering fully, just hovering. I turned toward him. "Do you want something to drink?" I asked. He nodded. "Milk," he said. I reached for a glass, poured it slowly. The sound of the liquid filling the glass was steady, familiar, comforting. I added a small spoonful of honey without asking, out of habit. I handed it to him. He took it, looked at it, and for a moment something softened in his expression. "Thanks," he said. He took a sip, and then another. We stood there in silence, not uncomfortable, just waiting. "Did something happen at school?" I asked gently. His shoulders shifted, a small movement, barely noticeable. "Not really," he said. I nodded. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" The words felt heavier than they used to. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at the glass in his hands. "I know," he said finally, but his voice lacked something, certainty. Before I could say anything else, Melissa's voice called from the living room. "Ethan, we're leaving soon." He looked toward the sound, then back at me. "Okay," he replied. He set the glass down on the counter. "Not finished. Thanks for the milk," he said, and then he left just like that. That evening after they were gone, I sat alone at the table. The same chairs, the same quiet, but everything felt slightly out of place. As if the room had shifted by a fraction and I couldn't quite adjust to it. I replayed the day in my mind, every glance, every pause, every word that had been said and the ones that hadn't. And slowly a pattern began to form, not clear, not complete. But enough to recognize this wasn't accidental. It wasn't just children growing up. It was something being taught, something being reinforced, gently, consistently. I thought about Melissa, about her careful words, her measured tone, the way she smiled without revealing too much. And I asked myself a question I hadn't wanted to ask before. Was she protecting them, or was she guiding them away from me? The difference mattered, more than I was ready to admit. I stood up from the table and walked to the living room. The armchair was there, still, waiting. I sat down slowly. The fabric creaked softly beneath me. I placed my hands on my lap, and for the first time I allowed the thought to fully settle. Someone had changed the way my grandchildren saw me, not suddenly, not harshly. But little by little, in quiet moments, in soft words, in small, almost invisible decisions, and I didn't know why. That night I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up, the silence of the house pressing in around me. Each time the same question returned, clearer now, sharper. Who had decided that I was no longer someone they could come to, and more importantly, why? By morning, I knew one thing for cert. I couldn't ignore it anymore, not if I wanted to understand what was happening. Not if I wanted to find my way back to them, because distance like this, it doesn't close on its own. Someone has to step forward, carefully, patiently, and I had a feeling that someone would have to be me. I didn't confront anyone right away. At my age, you learn that rushing toward an answer often pushes it further away. So instead, I chose something quieter. I paid attention. The next week, I called Hendrix on a Wednesday evening, not for any particular reason, at least not one I said out loud. "Hi, Mom," he answered, a little out of breath. "Were you busy?" I asked. Just finishing up some work, he said. Everything okay? Yes, I replied. I just thought I'd check in. There was a small pause. Everything's fine here, he said. Fine, that word again. I was thinking, I continued, maybe the children could come over one afternoon this week just for a few hours. Another pause, longer this time. Melissa usually plans their schedule, he said carefully. They've got a lot going on lately. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. I understand, I said, and I did. Children grow, their lives fill up, but something in his tone felt practiced, as if he had said those words before. Maybe next week, he added quickly. Of course, I said, whenever it works. We spoke a little longer after that. About nothing in particular, weather, work, small things, but the conversation felt like it was happening on the surface of something deeper, like we were both avoiding the same subject without acknowledging it. After we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I was beginning to feel something else, a kind of quiet determination. That Friday, I decided to visit them, not unannounced. I called ahead. Melissa answered. Hello, she said, her voice calm as always. Hi, Melissa, it's me, I said. Oh, hello, she replied. Is everything all right? Yes, I said. I was thinking of stopping by for a bit. I haven't seen the children since Sunday. There was a pause, brief but present. Today might not be the best day, she said. The kids have homework and it's been a long week. I won't stay long, I said gently, just a quick visit. Another pause and then, all right, but just for a little while. When I arrived, the house looked the same as it always had, neat, ordered. Almost staged, the curtains were drawn just enough to let in light without exposing too much. Shoes lined up by the door, everything in its place. Melissa greeted me with a polite smile. Come in, she said. Thank you, I replied. I stepped inside and for a moment I felt like a guest, not unwelcome, but not entirely at home either. The children were in the living room. Ethan sat at the table with a notebook open in front of him. Nora was on the floor, coloring. They both looked up when I entered. Hi, Grandma, Nora said. Her voice was warm but restrained. Ethan gave me a small nod. Hi, I smiled. Hi, my loves, I said. I walked over and knelt beside Nora. What are you drawing? I asked. She hesitated. Just for a second, and then she turned the paper slightly toward me. Just something, she said. It was a picture of a house. A simple one with a tree beside it, and 3 figures standing in front. I noticed immediately. There were only 3. It's very nice, I said softly. Thank you, she replied, but she didn't explain it. She didn't tell me who the figures were. She didn't lean closer. She didn't whisper. I stood up and moved toward Ethan. What are you working on? I asked. Math, he said. Do you need help? He shook his head. No, I've got it. I nodded. All right. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, waiting, hoping he might say more, but he didn't. Melissa entered the room then. Kids, why don't you take a short break? She said, her tone was light, encouraging. Ethan closed his notebook. Nora set down her crayons. They both stood, but instead of coming toward me, they moved toward her. I was thinking we could have some fruit, Melissa continued. Strawberries? Nora asked. Yes, Melissa said, smiling. Can I help? Nora added. Of course, she replied. They walked into the kitchen together. Ethan followed, and just like that, I was alone in the living room. I sat down slowly on the edge of the couch. The room was quiet, too quiet. From the kitchen, I could hear their voices. Soft, close, connected. I couldn't make out the words, only the tone, and something inside me recognized it, that easy, unguarded way of speaking, the kind they used to have with me. After a few minutes, I stood up and walked toward the kitchen, not to interrupt, just to join, but when I reached the doorway, I paused. Melissa was standing at the counter, cutting strawberries. Nora stood beside her, watching closely. Ethan leaned against the fridge. They were all facing inward. Toward each other, a small circle complete, I stepped forward. Those look good, I said. They all turned. Smiles appeared, quick, polite. Yes, Melissa said, fresh from the market. Would you like some? She asked. Thank you, I replied. She handed me a small bowl. I took it. Thank you, I said again, and then there was nothing more to say. I stayed for another 15 minutes, maybe 20. We spoke. Light conversation, safe topics, nothing too personal, nothing too deep, and then I stood up. I should go, I said, so soon. Hendrix asked from the hallway. He had just come home. Yes, I replied. I didn't want to interrupt your evening. You're not interrupting, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Melissa walked me to the door. Thank you for coming, she said. Of course, I replied. I hesitated just for a moment, and then I said, I hope I didn't come at a bad time. Her smile remained steady. Not at all, she said. We just have a routine during the week. Routine, I nodded. I understand, I said. As I stepped outside, the air felt colder than it had before. I wrapped my coat tighter around me, and for the first time the thought became clear. This wasn't just about the children. This was about something larger, something structured, something intentional. On the drive home, I replayed everything. The pauses, the glances, the careful words, and one moment stood out more than the others. Nora's drawing, the house, the three figures. That night I sat at my kitchen table again, the same crack in the wood, the same quiet. But now the unease had taken shape. It had edges, it had direction, and it pointed somewhere specific. Melissa wasn't just setting boundaries, she was defining them, redrawing the lines of what family meant, and somehow I had been placed just outside of it. But I still didn't know why. And that question, it refused to leave me, because people don't make changes like that without a reason. Not ones that affect children, not ones that reshape relationships. There had to be something I didn't know, something I hadn't seen, or worse. Something I had forgotten. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, and slowly, carefully I began to go over the past, not the recent past, further back, to when Hendrix first met Melissa, to the early days, to the small things I might have overlooked. Because sometimes the answer isn't in what's happening now. Sometimes it's hidden in something that happened long before. And as I sat there in the quiet of my home, one memory surfaced, faint at first, but persistent. A conversation, a moment, something Melissa had said early on. Something I hadn't thought much about at the time, but now it felt different. I opened my eyes, and for the first time since this all began, I felt something shift inside me. Not just unease, not just confusion, but recognition, because I was starting to understand. And with understanding came a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The memory didn't arrive all at once. It came the way old things do, slowly, in pieces. Like a photograph left too long in the sun, faded at the edges but still holding something clear in the center. It was early, not long after Hendrix had introduced Melissa to me. They had come over for dinner, just the two of them. The children weren't part of the picture yet. Everything felt new then, careful, hopeful. I remember I had made soup that night, something simple. I didn't want to overwhelm her. She sat across from me, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her back straight, her eyes attentive. She watched everything, the way I moved, the way I spoke, even the way Hendrix reached for his glass. At the time, I thought she was just trying to understand the rhythm of our family. Now, I wasn't so sure. At one point, Hendrix had stepped out to take a call. It left the two of us alone at the table. I remember the silence settling between us, not uncomfortable, just waiting. I smiled at her. You don't have to be so formal, I said gently. This is your home too. She smiled back, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I appreciate that, she said. There was a pause, and then she added, I think it's important to know where you stand in a family. The words had seemed reasonable at the time. Even thoughtful, I nodded. That comes with time, I replied. You don't have to figure it out all at once. She tilted her head slightly, as if considering my answer. And what if time doesn't make it clearer? She asked. I remember hesitating just for a moment. It usually does, I said, if everyone is honest. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached for her glass of water, took a small sip, and then she said something that back then I had dismissed. Sometimes honesty depends on who gets to define it. I hadn't understood what she meant, not fully. It sounded philosophical, abstract, the kind of thing people say when they're trying to sound thoughtful. But now, sitting alone in my kitchen years later, it didn't feel abstract at all. It felt precise. That wasn't the only moment. There were others, small, easily overlooked. I remembered the first time she rearranged my kitchen. It was subtle, just a few things moved. The spice rack shifted, utensils placed in different drawers. When I asked her about it, she smiled. I thought it might be more efficient this way, she said. I laughed it off. It's been working fine for years, I replied. Of course, she said quickly. I just like things a certain way. A certain way. At the time, it felt harmless. Now it felt like something else, a pattern. And then there was the day Nora was born. I had been in the hospital room, standing near the window, watching the soft rise and fall of that tiny chest. Hendrix had been beside Melissa, holding her hand. Everything felt full. Complete, until Melissa looked at me and said, We're going to raise her with very clear boundaries. I smiled. That's a good thing, I said. She nodded. Yes, we want her to understand who her primary attachments are. Primary attachments. The phrase had sounded clinical, almost academic. But I didn't question it. I trusted that love would find its own place, that there would be room for everyone. Now I wasn't so sure. I stood up from the table and walked to the window. Outside, the street was quiet. A thin layer of frost clung to the edges of the pavement. Everything looked still. But I knew better. Stillness can hide movement. The next Sunday, I decided I wouldn't just observe, I would speak, not loudly, not confrontationally, but clearly. Because silence, I was beginning to understand, had allowed too much to settle unchecked. When they arrived, I greeted them as usual, warmly, calmly. I served lunch. We sat at the table, the same positions, the same routine, but this time I didn't let the small moments pass. Nora, I said gently, last week you mentioned you were drawing something. Did you finish it? She looked up, surprised, as if she hadn't expected me to remember. Yes, she said. That's wonderful, I replied. I'd love to see it sometime. Her eyes flickered. Again, that small glance toward Melissa. Melissa set her fork down carefully. She's been working on a lot of things, she said. We're encouraging her to keep some of them private for now. Private, I nodded slowly. I understand the importance of privacy, I said. But I also hope she knows she can share things with me if she wants to. Melissa's smile remained in place. I'm sure she does, she said, but there was something in her tone, something final. Hendricks shifted in his seat. Mom, Melissa's just trying to give them structure, he said. His voice was gentle, but it carried weight. I'm not against structure, I replied calmly. I just don't want them to feel like they have to choose who they can talk to. They're not choosing, Melissa said softly. They're learning, she added. Learning what? I asked. The question came out more directly than I had intended, but it was too late to take it back. There was a pause, longer than any before. Melissa folded her hands together. Learning that different relationships have different roles, she said. I held her gaze. And what is my role? I asked. The room grew quiet. Even the children seemed to sense the shift. Ethan looked down at his plate. Nora sat very still. Melissa didn't look away. That's something we're helping them understand over time, she said. It was a careful answer, too careful. I've always been someone they could come to, I said. My voice remained steady, but I felt the weight of every word. And they still can, Hendricks said quickly. I turned to him. Can they? I asked. He hesitated just for a moment, but it was enough. Melissa spoke again. We're not trying to take anything away from you, she said. But we do believe that children need clarity, she continued. About who they go to for what? And you've decided that doesn't include me? I asked. Her expression didn't change. We've decided that certain conversations are best kept within the immediate household, she said. Immediate household. The words echoed in my mind, clear, defined, closed. I sat back in my chair. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue, because in that moment I understood something. This wasn't about a misunderstanding. This wasn't about a temporary phase. This was a decision, one that had been made quietly, consistently, over time. I see, I said softly, and I did, more than I wanted to. The rest of the meal passed in a strange kind of calm. No one mentioned it again. Conversation returned to safer topics, but nothing felt the same. After they left, I didn't walk through the house. I didn't sit in the armchair. I stayed at the table, looking at that same crack in the wood. But now it didn't feel like something old. It felt like something that had been growing, slowly, quietly. Until it couldn't be ignored anymore. I had my answer, not all of it, but enough. Melissa hadn't just influenced the children, she had redefined the structure of the family, and Hendricks had allowed it, maybe even agreed with it. I wasn't angry. Not in the way people expect. There was no shouting, no tears, just a deep, steady understanding. Because sometimes the hardest part is what people take from you. It's what they decide you no longer are, and now I had to decide what to do with that. That night, I didn't try to distract myself. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't busy my hands with small, meaningless tasks the way I sometimes do when I want to avoid thinking. I sat with it, all of it, the conversation at the table, Melissa's calm, measured voice. Hendricks's hesitation, the children's silence. It settled around me slowly like dust you don't notice until it covers everything. I had spent years believing that love, when given consistently, created its own place, that it didn't need to be negotiated or defined. That it lived naturally in the spaces between people, but now I understood something I hadn't wanted to see. Love might be natural, but access to it, that could be controlled. I stood up and walked to the living room. The house felt different, not empty. Just quieter in a way that felt more final. I looked at the armchair again. For the first time, I didn't sit in it. Instead, I turned away. The next morning, I made a decision, not out of anger, not out of pride, but out of clarity. If someone had quietly redrawn the lines around me, then I needed to decide whether I would continue standing where I was no longer being invited. I called Hendrix. He answered on the third ring. "Hi, Mom." "Hi," I said. There was a pause, not uncomfortable, but aware. "I've been thinking about yesterday," I continued. "Okay," he said. "I want to understand something," I said, "and I'd like you to be honest with me." He exhaled softly. "I'll try," he replied. "Do you believe the children should come to me with their problems?" I asked. The question was simple, but it carried everything inside it. There was a long silence on the other end, long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "Hendrix," I said gently. "I'm here," he replied. Another pause. And then carefully he said, "I think it depends on the situation." I closed my eyes, not in frustration, just to steady myself. "Depends on what?" I asked. "On what's appropriate," he said. "And who decides that?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. "I guess we do," he said finally. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "I see," I said. "Mom, it's not what you think," he added quickly. "Then help me understand what it is," I said. He hesitated. And in that hesitation, I heard something I hadn't expected. Not defensiveness, not certainty, but uncertainty. As if he was trying to hold onto something he didn't fully believe in himself. "Melissa just feels that sometimes things get complicated when too many voices are involved," he said. "Complicated how?" I asked. "Different advice," he replied. "Different perspectives." "That's not always a bad thing," I said. "I know," he said. "But she wants consistency for the kids." Consistency, I had heard that word before, wrapped in calm explanations, presented as something reasonable, and maybe it was. But something about the way it was being used felt less like guidance, and more like control. "Do you agree with her?" I asked. Another pause, this one heavier. "I think she's trying to do what's best," he said. "That's not what I asked," I replied gently. The silence that followed told me more than his words ever could. "Hendrix," I said, my voice steady, "have I ever given your children a reason not to trust me?" "No," he said immediately. "Have I ever overstepped in a way that harmed them?" "No," he repeated. "Then why?" I asked quietly. "Am I being placed outside of their trust?" He didn't answer, not because he didn't hear me, but because he didn't have an answer he could say out loud. "I don't want to argue," I continued. "And I'm not asking you to choose sides." "I'm not," he began. "I know," I said softly. "That's part of the problem." There was a long pause, and in that pause something shifted, not in him, in me. "I'm not going to fight for a place that used to be mine," I said. My voice was calm, clear. "I won't stand in a doorway waiting to be invited into a relationship that I helped build." "Mom," he said, his tone changing. There was something in it now. Concern, maybe even fear. "I love you," I said, "and I love those children more than I can explain." "I know," he replied. "Then listen to me," I said. "I will always be here for them. That hasn't changed. But I will not compete for their trust." The words settled between us, heavy, final. "What are you saying?" he asked. "I'm saying that I'm stepping back," I replied. "Not away from them, not out of their lives, but out of a position where I have to prove that I belong." "That's not what we're asking you to do," he said. "No," I said. "It's what the situation has become." He was quiet, and I knew he was trying to find the right words. "But sometimes there aren't any." "I don't want this to create distance," he said. "It already has," I replied gently. We ended the call not long after. There was no argument, no raised voices, just a quiet understanding that something had changed. That week I didn't call. I didn't visit, I didn't plan Sunday lunch. For the first time in years, I let the routine go. Sunday came and went. The house remained quiet. No footsteps, no laughter, no small voices asking questions or sharing secrets. I made myself a simple meal. Sat at the table, ate slowly, not out of sadness, but out of awareness. This was what it felt like to step back. The following week, I filled my time differently. I took longer walks, visited places I hadn't been to in years. I even met an old friend for coffee, small things, but they reminded me of something important. My life had not begun with them, and it would not end without them. Still, there were moments. Quiet ones where I felt the absence, not as pain, but as something missing its shape. On Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. I looked at the screen. Hendrix. I let it ring once more before answering. "Hi," I said. "Hi, Mom," he replied. There was something different in his voice. Less certain, more searching. "The kids asked about you," he said. I felt something shift in my chest, not sharp, just present. "And what did you tell them?" I asked. "That you've been busy," he said. I nodded. "That's true," I replied. There was a pause. And then he said, "Nora wanted to show you something." I closed my eyes for a moment. The image of her drawing came back to me, the house, the three figures. "She can show me any time," I said. My voice remained steady. "But it has to be her choice." "I know," he said, and for the first time in days I believed him. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet again, but this time it felt different, because stepping back hadn't erased the connection. It had simply revealed it. And sometimes that's the only way to see what's truly still there. The silence didn't last forever. It never does, not when something real still exists underneath it. A few days after Hendrix's call, there was a knock on my door. It was early afternoon, the kind of quiet hour when the light falls gently across the floor and everything feels paused. I wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment, I considered not answering, not out of fear, just out of habit, but something told me to get up, so I did. When I opened the door, Nora was standing there, holding Hendrix's hand. Her coat slightly too big for her shoulders, her hair pulled back in a loose braid that had already begun to come undone, and in her other hand, a folded piece of paper. "Hi, Grandma," she said. Her voice was soft, but not distant, not polite, something closer to what it used to be. I looked at Hendrix. He gave me a small nod, not an explanation, not an apology, just acknowledgement. "Hi, my love," I said. I stepped aside. "Come in." They entered slowly, as if unsure of the space, as if they were stepping into something that had changed. Nora walked ahead of Hendrix. She stopped in the middle of the living room, looked around, then turned back to me. "I made something," she said. Her fingers tightened around the paper. "I'd love to see it," I replied. I kept my voice gentle, open, no pressure. She walked over and handed it to me, carefully, as if it might break. I unfolded it slowly. It was another drawing, the same house. The same tree, but this time there were 4 figures. I felt something shift inside me, not sudden, not overwhelming, just a quiet recognition. "That's beautiful," I said softly. She looked up at me. "Do you know who everyone is?" she asked. I knelt down slightly so we were at eye level. "That's you," I said, pointing, "and that's Ethan." She nodded. "And that's Mama," she added. I paused just for a moment. "And this one?" I asked. She looked at the figure, then back at me. "That's you," she said. There was no hesitation in her voice, no glance over her shoulder, no quiet permission being asked, just certainty. I smiled, not wide, not overly emotional, just enough. "Thank you for including me," I said. She frowned slightly. "Why wouldn't you be there?" she asked. The question was simple, but it carried something deeper, something honest. The kind of honesty that children have before the world teaches them to complicate things. I reached out and gently touched her hand. "Sometimes," I said carefully, "people get a little confused about where everyone belongs." She thought about that, her brow furrowed slightly, and then she said, "I'm not confused." I nodded. "I can see that," I replied. Hendrix shifted behind us. I stood up slowly. Turned toward him. "Thank you for bringing her," I said. He looked at me, really looked this time, and I could see it. The weight he had been carrying, the uncertainty, the quiet conflict. "She asked," he said simply. "I know," I replied. There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just real. "I think," he began, then stopped. He ran a hand through his hair. "I think maybe we've been trying too hard to get things right," he said. I didn't answer immediately. I let the words settle. "Sometimes," I said, "when people try too hard to control something, they end up changing it." He nodded slowly. "I see that now," he said. From the kitchen, Nora's voice called out, "Grandma, do you still have the honey milk?" I smiled. "Yes, I do," I replied. She ran toward the kitchen without waiting, just like she used to. Hendrix watched her go, then looked back at me. "Melissa thinks structure is important," he said. "I know," I replied. "She didn't mean to," he started. I raised my hand slightly, not to stop him, just to pause the moment. "I don't think this is about intention," I said. "It's about impact." He exhaled, as if something inside him had finally been named. "I didn't see it happening," he admitted. "It didn't happen all at once," I said. "That's why it was easy to miss." We stood there for a moment, two people, both trying to understand something that had already unfolded. I don't want to lose this, he said quietly. You haven't, I replied. But you came close. He nodded. I know. From the kitchen we could hear Nora humming softly. The sound filled the space in a way that felt familiar, restoring. Can I ask you something? Hendrik said, of course. Why didn't you fight harder? He asked. I looked at him, not surprised, just thoughtful. Because love isn't something you force people to accept, I said. If someone has to be convinced to let you matter, then you're already losing something important. He didn't respond right away, but I could see he understood. I think we need to talk, he said, not just you and me. I nodded. Yes, I said, we do. That evening after they left, I didn't feel the same emptiness I had before. The house was still quiet, but it wasn't hollow. There was something else there now, not resolution, not yet, but movement. Because the truth had started to come into the open, not all at once, but enough. And once something is seen clearly, it can't be unseen. I placed Nora's drawing on the table, smoothed it out carefully, looked at it for a long time. 4 figures standing in front of the same house. Simple, clear, uncomplicated. Children have a way of seeing things as they are before adults begin to rearrange them. And maybe, just maybe, that was where we needed to begin again.